Hey guys, welcome back. We're diving into lesson number 5, working with MIDI. In lesson 4, we built out a new track using audio loops, got to work with some audio a little bit. In this lesson, we're going to be focusing more on the MIDI side of things. So taking an input such as a musical MIDI keyboard or even your computer keyboard and turning them into sound. As always, guys, the best way to learn is by doing, so please join me and follow along. Don't hesitate to click around the interface, explore, and put the concepts we'll cover into practice. Remember, you can't mess up, and even if you think you have, it's easy enough to undo anything in Ableton. All right, let's get started. So, to get started, I am going to right-click over here and insert a MIDI track. You can also use the keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-T, to insert a new MIDI track, or of course, there is a menu bar item, insert a new MIDI track. And I'm gonna need all 3 of these, so I'm just gonna leave them there. So you'll notice that these volume bars aren't present yet on our new MIDI track, and that's because there isn't an instrument here in our effects chain down at the bottom that's gonna generate any sound yet. And so there's no volume to be heard from this brand new MIDI track yet. In order to hear sound out of our brand new MIDI track, we're going to have to add an instrument that will translate our MIDI data into something we can actually hear through the speakers. So to get a new instrument, I'm going to go to the instrument section on the left in your browser, and I'm going to pull in, let's see what we got here. I'm looking for something. Let's hear the track again. I think I'm gonna go with something that has a little bit of a pluck to it, a little bit of the synth high-end pluck, blip kind of sound. So let's see what we got here. Again, just using the browser to find something that sounds in the ballpark of what I'm looking for instrument-wise. I'm going to go ahead and drag that over onto this new MIDI track. And you'll notice that once I've added an instrument to this track, that two things have happened. I have added these volume bars, which means that I can hear sound out of this track. And also, all of these stop buttons that you'll see, as you've seen on audio tracks with empty clip slots, have now turned into little O's or little record buttons. Okay, so we've got in our transport bar, play, stop, and record. Okay, now each one of these clip slots is record enabled if your MIDI track overall is record enabled at the bottom. All record enabling is it's going to look for MIDI input. It's going to listen for MIDI input from your MIDI controller or even your computer keyboard. I'll get into how to do that a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and turn this down a little bit. I feel like it's going to be a little bit loud against the track. You want to definitely keep it loud enough to hear. Okay, so basic MIDI principles, working with MIDI, okay? You can either drag a MIDI clip in from your browser, okay? We will do that in a later session. But for right now, I just want to raw input some MIDI signal. So there's basically 2 ways in which I can do that, okay? I can either find my MIDI first, and play it in live. Let's give that a try. So what I've done here is I've just clicked on any empty slot here that has a little O here, that not a square, a little circle. And that will instantly start recording into that slot, into that clip slot. It will make a new clip for me and record my input. Now, I've got my count in set to 1 bar, and that's why you heard a before it starts recording, okay? So your count in is gonna be how many bars or measures before Ableton starts recording into that clip slot. So with a 2-bar count in, now I'll have 8 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and record. And now you can see live what I'm gonna play in. Okay? That's about how easy it is. Now there's one more way to get MIDI input into Ableton Live using this method, and that's actually using your computer keyboard. I know, it's amazing, crazy concept. So the way we're gonna do that is that we're going to go to the top right of Ableton's main window and click this little piano icon, okay? What that's going to do is it's going to effectively turn our computer keyboard into a musical keyboard. So ASD are going to be C, D, E on a musical keyboard. F and G are the same keys on your computer keyboard as they are musically. And then H, J are going to be A, B. So C, D, E, F, G, H, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. You can switch octaves with Z and X. So Z will take you down, X. Okay? So you don't even really need a MIDI keyboard. All you really need is a laptop or a desktop with a keyboard, a computer keyboard, in order to get musical MIDI information into Ableton. So let's try that same pattern again. So it'll allow you on your computer keyboard to play C and D of the next octave up using K and L. So that's close enough. So redo that. I'm so much more used to the 1-bar count in. You'll notice also that when I play in a new MIDI clip, once I press the spacebar to stop, Ableton will intuitively know that whatever measure I stopped after, okay, I went 1 to 2 to 3, it's gonna automatically loop me out at the correct length. Okay, so even though that instrument, that performance, I should say, of that instrument is a little bit off in terms of the timing of the looping overall with the loop race is spot on. Ableton just knows that that's what I meant to do. I wouldn't want, by default, a clip to play off a whole bar, especially if I stopped it right after playing 2 straight bars. So those are the 2 ways of direct inputting MIDI signal into Ableton by performing it, either using a MIDI keyboard or using a computer keyboard. There is a 3rd way of inputting MIDI into Ableton, which is a lot more methodical, robotical, a lot less performance-based, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But before we do, I just want to take a quick second to go over one of the features that you're probably going to use very often while playing MIDI parts in. If you choose to go down this road of playing MIDI parts in or performing them on your MIDI keyboard or computer keyboard, then you're probably going to end up, if you're a human being, with a performance that isn't perfect. And by perfect, I mean spot on the grid, no fluctuations in time whatsoever. As you can hear, some of these notes drift a little bit from the beat. I mean, you can see even in the MIDI, you can see this one's a little bit behind, this one's a little bit off, this one's a little ahead. So very simply what I'm going to do is right click and go to Quantize Settings. Okay, quantizing is taking things that are off of the grid and moving them back onto the grid. So at a 16th note grid, that means that there would be 16 divisions per bar. So if I went in here, that's what a 16th note grid would be. See, 4 divisions per quarter note. There's another 4 to make 8, 12, and there's 16. So from bar 1 to bar 2, there's going to be 16 individual divisions. Okay, it's a pretty standard grid to quantize against. Right click again and go in Quantize Settings. And in your quantize menu, you've got the ability to adjust both the start and the end of each note. You could do just the end, you could do just the start, and you could do both. Doing neither would basically do nothing. So I'm going to do start and end, and amount is going to be how human versus robotic you want your quantizing to be. So if I leave it at 100%, it's going to take every single note, as you can see, by Command Z, that you see they shifted back, and Command Shift C to redo. It's going to put everything perfectly on the beat. So the beginnings and the endings of each note perfectly on. Now, if I was to move this percentage down, okay, if I went to 0, again, it would be like putting start and end off of the adjust note settings. It wouldn't do anything. 0 is going to do nothing. 100% is going to be completely on the grid, exactly. 50% is going to be an equal blend between the two, so it's going to give you a more human feel. Okay, it's going to give you, if you're just a slightly off the grid and you want to keep some of that performance without sounding too robotic, you can go between 50 and 100% to suit your taste. So I'm going to try 50 and just show you what that looks like. So now I've adjusted everything, okay, 50% closer. So it's not 100% closer right on the grid. It's going to be 50% closer to where it should be based on a perfect performance, a perfect robotic performance, that is. So that doesn't sound too bad. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it to 100 and just hit OK, because I want it to be right on the grid. But if you've played it in fairly well, if you've played in your performance fairly well, and you like the timing of it, it's just not tight enough timing-wise, go ahead and choose something between 50 and 100%. Don't go all the way to 100, and maybe between 50 and 80, and that'll give you the essence of your performance, but just slightly more in time, slightly more corrected. Okay? So once you've got your quantize settings the way you want, once you verify that, you only really need to do that once per project. Once you've set those up, unless you want to change them, now you can just hit quantize, and you can quantize any notes within a new clip using the settings you've already defined. So if I just want everything to be on a 16th note grid with the start and the end of the notes quantized to 100% all the time, I can just right click and hit quantize, and it's going to do that for me in a new clip. I don't have to go back into quantize settings every single time. Okay? So now that we've covered that, let's go over the short key commands really quickly. Okay? If you're in a brand new clip and you want to quantize, just hit Command A to select all, hit Command Shift U to pull up your quantize settings. And since I've already set up my quantize settings in a previous clip, what I'm going to do now is just click anywhere within this clip and hit Command U. And I know that all of the notes in this clip will quantize to the settings that I've previously defined in my quantize settings. Okay? So now that we've covered how to perform MIDI into Ableton using either your MIDI keyboard or your computer keyboard, I'm going to disable the computer keyboard here, and I'm going to enable the pencil tool here right next to it. So any empty MIDI clip slot within a MIDI track can be converted into a new MIDI clip simply just by double-clicking on it. And once you double-click on it, now you can use the pencil tool to draw in any notes that you want to draw in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this started. I'm just going to start drawing some notes in. Click once to enable a note. Click it again to get rid of it. So you can see how just clicking and drawing, it's much more of a step sequencer type input, but it allows you to just completely go crazy and just draw things in wherever you want without having to really depend too much on any kind of input source. Even if you don't have a MIDI keyboard and you just have a laptop and you just want to use your computer keyboard to play in the notes. And you don't even want to go that far with having to figure out the musicality of it and having to perform it and having to play it in. You can use the pencil tool to simply just draw in the notes as you go. So that's how to get MIDI into Ableton. Okay? Now that we have some MIDI in Ableton, I'm going to go ahead and hit B on my keyboard to disable the pencil tool so that I'm back to my selection and cursor tool. Okay? Now that we've gotten MIDI into Ableton, what can we do with the MIDI? Okay, so we've quantized our MIDI previously when we performed it in. Drawing the MIDI in, we don't have to worry about that. It's going to conform to whatever our grid is here within each clip. But we've got all of these handy features down here for each MIDI clip. So the first thing you're going to want to do is figure out how long you want your MIDI clip loop to be. Right now, the length of this loop is only 1 bar, as you can see down here in the length area. I'm looping it, but it's only 1 bar long. Even the ones I played in were 2 bars. So what you can do here is a couple things. You can either dial in the length exactly by just clicking and typing in the length that you want your loop to be. If I want it to be 2 bars, I just type in 2 bars. You can also, just Command Z to get back here, Command Shift C to redo that, okay. So what I can also do is just drag the length up. So a lot of ways to interact with the interface in Ableton. I want this to be a 4-bar loop, but I want to repeat the MIDI that's in here exactly and just change it up on the ending. So what I'm going to do is just hit duplicate loop once to get it from 1 bar to 2 bars, and then once more to get it from 2 bars to 4 bars. So it's taken not only the time, but also the MIDI and duplicated my loop twice. Really, really handy feature, okay? The other thing you can do is if you've already set your length up without duplicating the MIDI, what you could do is just make sure that your length of your selection and all of the MIDI that you want to go and be duplicated over is selected, and just hit Command D a couple times, and that will duplicate out the MIDI within an already determined loop length down here. Okay, so a couple ways to edit your MIDI clip length. Once you've got that set up the way you want, you've got a bunch of ways that you can manipulate the MIDI at this point to make it perfect to your ear. Obviously, you can click and drag MIDI up and down through notes. You can drag it left and right, okay? Down here, though, you've got the velocity of each MIDI note. And as I drag this down, you can see the note itself getting lighter in intensity in this red color as I drag the velocity down, and higher as I drag, and redder, I should say, darker red, as I drag the velocity up. Velocity is akin to loudness, how hard you're hitting a key on your keyboard. And most instruments translate that velocity into loudness or tonal intensity on the output of the MIDI. So let's go ahead and just draw a bunch of these. So you can hear right there how these less intense velocity notes, these lesser velocity notes play out much quieter than a high velocity note, or a note with a high velocity. Okay? So that's one of the most basic ways to get a more expressive performance. Now, some more tips when editing MIDI, okay? Use the bracket to adjust length. You can hold down Command without having this open down here and hover over any MIDI note, and you'll notice that up here in this area, a number is going to pop up. 26 for that note, 38 for that note, 127 for that note. If I hold down Command while my cursor is over any MIDI note, I can adjust that MIDI note's velocity. And you can see the velocity changing down here. Okay? I can also select multiple notes to change velocities of multiple notes at the same time by just selecting the notes that I want, hovering over one of them, and then clicking and dragging up and down while holding down the Command key on that specific MIDI note. And it can be any one of these MIDI notes. I should say that as well. It can be any one of the MIDI notes that you have selected. Just be aware that when you're editing velocities or changing velocities of multiple notes with this method, be aware that when you change the velocities, they're going to scale against each other. So you notice how these two on the left here are moving a lot faster than the two on the right because they're changing in reference to each other. But once you go up past a certain point, the notes will level off. So just be aware of that if you want to maintain. See, now they're all the same level. So that's a quick way to make notes all the same level if that's what you want, to even them out. But just be careful if that's not what you want, that will happen if you go up too high or down too low while editing velocities in this manner, okay? So that's velocity editing. You can edit the position of any note just by dragging it up, down, left, right. Edit the length by using the brackets, beginning or ending of the note. And while we're talking about note lengths, it should be noted that you can at any time hit this button over here. These buttons in Live 9 for MIDI editing make MIDI editing very, very quick and fluid. Just like you can duplicate loop, you can also hit this legato key, which is going to take every note and pull the ending of the note out to the next note in the clip. So again, let me show you that one more time. Notice how this note will be pulled to here, this note will be pulled to here, and so on and so forth. All I have to do is hit one button, and all the notes will be lengthened, legatoed, held until the next note in the clip, and that works with chords and individual notes as well. So now, sounds a little bit different than that. If I legato, so that's legato. You can also reverse the entire clip. Great for making variations or just getting some spontaneous creative injection into your composition. You can invert the notes. So that's basically going to take every single note here, base it on the first one, and it's going to flip your entire MIDI clip upside down in terms of the notes. There you go. Just be careful because that might throw some notes completely out of your scale musically. There's two more quick key buttons here that you can click on, and one is going to divide your clip length, the time of your MIDI notes throughout your clip, in half. So it's going to play them in effect twice as fast. The other one is, you guessed it, going to do the exact opposite and multiply the time that it takes your MIDI notes to play out by 2 so that your notes will play out in effect half as fast. So there you go. There you have it. That is the basics of working with MIDI in Ableton Live. Just remember, both MIDI and audio reside in clips. Clips that can be option drag to duplicate them, and clips that can be worked with in the same way. So with that said, I've got something going here in this session, in this project that I think has potential. And the second that happens, you should be saving your work. So in the next lesson, lesson 6, we're gonna go over saving your session. See you then, guys.